Hi, kindergarten readers. Today we're going to read a story, and this story is a Little Red Riding Hood story. Now, this is a different kind than maybe you've heard before. A lot of times it's a girl with the red hood, and she meets a wolf in the forest. But today we're going to read one that's from another country. So it's kind of fun, and I hope you enjoy it. Now, this um, is from a place called Ghana in Africa. And so it's quite a ways away from Seattle. If you look up, you can see the little dot in the corner, it's in Seattle. And then all the way down where that red dot is where Ghana is. It would take a while to get there by airplane. And today we're going to read that story, and it's called Pretty Salma. It's a lot of fun. I really love the illustrations in the book, and I'm glad to be able to share it with you. And here's some pictures from Ghana. There's some boys in school up there. Some pictures from the market and the flag and some food. And you'll see some pictures in this book also that might match some of these photographs. Kindergartners, I chose one of my favorite places to read outside. I live in a building where I can go up on the roof, and it's really cool. There's these nice chairs, and there's these umbrellas, and sometimes I like to get a book and curl up on one of these comfy sofas and read. So today I'm reading to you from one of my favorite spots. And this book is called Pretty Salma, a Little Red Riding Hood story from Africa by Nikki Daly. And as you can see, the pictures are really fun. They're my favorite part of the book. And here's the title page, Pretty Salma by Nikki Daly. Salma lived with her granny and grandfather on the quiet side of town. One day her granny said, "Salma, pretty Salma, please go to the market for your old granny who loves you so." Salma put on her blue scarf, her stripy natama, her pretty white beads, and her yellow sandals. Stopping within her natama, lifted Granny's big straw basket onto her head, and kissed Granny goodbye. "Straight there and back again," said Granny, "and don't talk to strangers, you hear?" "Okay, I promise," said Salma. Off went Salma, flip-flop, in her yellow sandals. As she walked, she sang her favorite song. "Oh, Salma, pretty Salma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so." At the market, she bought a giant watermelon, a speckled rooster, an ice-cold pink drink, and a bunch of candy-striped straws. The sun was growing hot and the basket felt very heavy, so Selma decided to take a shortcut home through the wild side of town. Along the way, she sang her favorite song. "Oh, Selma, pretty Selma, come kiss Granny, your darling old Granny who loves you so." "Are you pretty Selma?" asked the stranger. It was Mr. Dog. He had been listening to her song. "Yes," said Selma. "Are you going to Granny's?" asked Mr. Dog. "Yes," said Selma. "Well, your basket is much too heavy for such a pretty little head," said Mr. Dog. "Allow me to carry it for you." Selma did feel a bit dizzy from the heat, so she agreed to let Mr. Dog carry her basket. After a while, Mr. Dog asked, "What are you wearing on your feet?" "Sandals," replied pretty Selma. "They must be making your little feet very hot," he said. "Why don't I wear them for you?" So they stopped, and Mr. Dog slipped his big feet into Selma's sandals. On they went, floppity-flip, flippity-flop. After a while, Mr. Dog asked, "What's that wrap you're wearing?" "My Nityama," replied Selma. "I bet you feel cooler without it. I'd be happy to wear it for you. No sooner had Mr. Dog wrapped Selma's nitiama around himself than he asked for her scarf and pretty beads. How do I look? Asked Mr. Dog, striking a pose. There's a motorcycle going by, so it's kind of loud. This picture I'm showing you so you can see the whole thing, but I'll read each individual page on the next pages. Mr. Dog strutted along the road in high style. Selma began to miss her things, but then when she asked for them back, Mr. Dog only said, "Some music will help us beat this heat. Won't you teach me a song?" So Selma tried to teach him her favorite song. "Oh, Selma, pretty Selma, come kiss Granny, your darling old granny who loves you so." But Mr. Dog was hopeless at singing. All he could do was go, "Woof, woof, woof." "I need a lot more practice," said Mr. Dog. "And until I learn to sing, you won't get your things back." Here's another page I want to show you where you can see the whole thing. There's 2 pages, so I'll read them separately, but I wanted to show you the whole page before I go on and read them. Selma begged, Selma pleaded, "Mr. Dog, please give me back my things." Mr. Dog growled, "Shh! You will never, ever get your things back. Now run away, little girl, before I bite you in two." Poor Selma got such a fright when she saw his sharp teeth that she ran and ran and ran. Oops. Until she found her grandfather dressed in his Anansi costume, telling stories. When grandfather heard Selma's story, he said, "That's a very exciting story, Selma, but it doesn't sound like a happy ending. How can we save Granny?" "I know," said Selma. "We'll scare Mr. Dog." "Exactly how will we scare Mr. Dog?" asked grandfather. "Like this," said Selma, putting on the mask of Kakamatobi, the boogeyman. Selma picked up Anansi's atumpan and beat it loudly. "Gwema, gwema." Grandfather picked up his rattlers and gave them a fierce shake. "Shuka, shuka." Little Akubakar, who loved a good scare, joined in with clapping sticks. "Katak, katak." "Let's go," cried Selma. When Granny saw Mr. Dog flip-flopping up the path, she thought it was her pretty Selma. "Selma, pretty Selma, come give your Granny who loves you a kiss," cried Granny. Mr. Dog leapt up and gave her a sloppy kiss. "Oh, my Selma," cried Granny, "what a wet nose you have." Granny took the heavy basket from Mr. Dog and said, "Selma, pretty Selma, you look hungry. Let's eat." Mr. Dog started to chase the speckled rooster round and round. "Oh, my Selma," cried Granny, "what an appetite you have." Then Granny said, "Selma, pretty Selma, it's time for your bath." Into the bath leapt Mr. Dog. "Oh, my Selma," said Granny, "what hairy ears you have." "Are you sure you are my pretty Selma?" "Oh, yes, yes, yes," cried Mr. Dog, jumping into Granny's lap and wagging his tail. Now Granny was really worried. Did her pretty Selma have a tail? Perhaps this wasn't her pretty Selma. Well, there was only one way to find out. "Let's sing our favorite song," said Granny, and she started to sing, "Oh, Selma, pretty Selma, come kiss Granny, your darling old granny who loves you so." "Woof, woof, woof," barked Mr. Dog. Then Granny knew she had been tricked. She reached for her broom. "Out! Get out!" But Mr. Dog liked being pretty Selma far too much to leave Granny's house, so instead he growled and snapped at her. Granny was afraid Mr. Dog would bite her in two, so she jumped into her cooking pot. Mr. Dog pushed the lid down. Nice, he thought. Granny soup. Granny cried, "Help! Help! Help!" Just then the door burst open with a loud "Gwama, gwama!" "Shuka, shuka, shuka!" When Mr. Dog saw Kakamatobi the boogeyman and his gang, he got a terrible fright. That bad dog slipped and tripped over his miserable tail right out of the house, back to the wild side of town. And here's another page where I want to show you the whole thing before I read it, because it's kind of a fun page. They get to eat the watermelon and drink their pink juice. Salma took off her mask and helped Granny climb out of the pot. Then they all sat down to eat watermelon and sip on ice-cold pink drink through candy-striped straws. The next day, Granny sent Salma to market to buy her new clothes. Salma went straight there and back, and she never talked to strangers again. The end. All right, kindergartners, now what we're going to do is we're going to look at retelling. We're going to retell the story that we read, and something to help us remember what to talk about is something called the retelling hand. So if you look at, there's 5 points that we're going to talk about. One of them is the setting. One of them is the characters. Another is the problem. We're going to talk about the events that happened in the story, the beginning, middle, and end. And then we're also going to talk about the solution, how we solve the problem. So first of all, we're going to look at this one right here, the setting. What is the setting in the story that we just read? Think about, where did it happen? Where did the story happen? Now, there's a few different settings in this book, so let's take a look at them. The first setting that we saw was Granny and Grandpa's house. At the beginning, Granny was saying goodbye to Salma as she was going off to go to market, and the second place was the market. So there's another setting, and the third one was the wild side of town. So there's a few different settings in the book. And next we are going to look at the characters. You can see I've highlighted it right there. And the characters are all the people, anyone in the book that had a main part in the book. Sometimes there's characters that don't have really main parts. You might see them on the pages, but they don't have main parts. But these are the characters who maybe talked in the book, or just some of the main people or animals that are in the book. Let's take a look at ones. We're in our book right now. Who are the characters? So first of all, Granny was a character. Mr. Dog was a character. Selma was a character. And Grandpa was a character. Now, all 4 of these were the main characters in the book. There were some other ones in the background, or even you can notice in the pictures of some other characters. But these are the ones that were spoken about the most or had a role in the story. Thirdly, we're going to talk about the problem in the story. And the problem is right there. I highlighted it. And the problem is just that. It's a problem. It's a problem that has to be solved or fixed. So let's look at what the problem we just read. Now, what I noticed is there was a couple different problems in the book. So I labeled them problem 1 and problem 2. So let's take a look. Problem 1 was, I want to see if you can guess what it is when I put the pictures up before I show you. What do you think the first problem was? Take a look at this picture. It kind of gives you some clues. Yes, the problem was that Mr. Dog would not give Selma her things back. So he wasn't being very kind. He took her things. He was running off. That was the first problem. Now, the second problem. Think about it for a second. What do you think the second problem was? What was the second problem? I'll show you the picture and see if you can guess what it is. The second problem was when Granny needed some help. That was the second problem. And fourth on our retelling hand is events. What are the events in the story? What happened first? What happened second, third, beginning, middle, end? So we're going to talk about the events in the story. Now, when you retell the story, you don't want to just go and reread the story again. You want to think about what happened and tell it in your own words. So I kind of went back and made a little list. I wrote things down, but you don't have to write them down. You can just say them. So first, Selma went to the market, and then Selma got what she needed at the market. And then she met Mr. Dog, and he took her things and would not give them back. Selma went to get help from Grandpa. Then Granny thought Mr. Dog was Selma. Then Granny realized she was being tricked. Grandpa and Selma scared Mr. Dog away, and then Selma went and got some new clothes. Sometimes when I'm retelling, I like to go back and just kind of look at the pictures to remind myself what happens, or sometimes I create my own pictures and I can reenact or retell the story using my own pictures. And then finally, the last thing on our hand, the little pinky finger, is the solution. Solution is how did they fix the problem in the book. Now, if you think back and you go, what was the problem again? Oh yeah, there was kind of two problems. There was Granny needed help, and Selma had the problem of Mr. Dog taking all of her things. She also needed help. So if we go ahead and look, I'll just highlight it and you can see it big. It's the solution. And we're the solution was in the book. Think back, if you think back, what was the solution in the book? Do you remember? I'll show you a picture and see if you can remember what the solution was. How did they solve that problem? Yes, Selma and her grandfather scared Mr. Dog away. Now, I'm going to share with you how to make your own retell hand. So take a look at the screen right now, and you can first thing you can do is just go ahead and trace your hand. So put your hand on some paper. I like to use a pencil and you trace around each finger just to make the shape of your hand. Go ahead and do that. And there's your hand. Now the next part you're going to do is you are going to label each of the fingers to help you remember each of those parts. Now the first one you can put down as the setting. And I like to draw a little picture to remind myself, like a house or a tree or a farm. I do actually have a little picture of a city there as well to help you remember what the setting is in the story. The second word you're going to write on the second finger is characters, and you can see the word right at the top of the screen up there. Characters. Who are the characters in this story? So what I like to do is I just write it on the finger, write it right on the finger, and then draw maybe a few people on the top or some animals to remind you who are the characters in the story. And then the third finger is, look right here, is where you're going to put problem. And you can see the word right at the top of the screen again, problem. What is the problem in the story that you read? And I like to make a little lock. So I made a little lock because you have to open it. You have to solve it. You have to open it up and solve the problem. And then fourth is the events. What happens first? What happens second? What happens third? What happens at the beginning, in the middle, and the end? You're going to retell all the events that happen in the story. And finally, the last one. So we had settings, character, problem, events. Is the solution. How did they solve the problem at the end? Did they come up with an idea? What did they do to solve the problem at the end of the story? And there you go. There is your retell hand to help you retell stories that you read. You can do the settings, the character, the problem, events, and solution. Try using this at home. Give it a try. If you do, send me a picture of it. I'd love to see your retell hand. And my cat is sniffing my retell hand. So go ahead and share with me your retell hand if you do it. And practice retelling stories that you read using your retell hand, given the setting, talking about the characters, the problem and the solution, and the beginning, middle, and end. What happens in the story?